So we are in the series of video talking about underscoring. Underscoring, in our sense, is really playing music quietly under something that's happening, under maybe like a spoken dialogue, under a visual scene, or a lot of us, when we're piano players, we play underneath churches and for churches, underneath pastors praying, reading scripture, and all that kind of stuff. And our function is really more than just playing some background, and we can do a very important role in establishing the mood and also the feeling and the atmosphere of whatever is being talked about. So our question is, how do we do that? How do we do this effectively? Is there an approach and different ways to think about it? How can we support the dynamic in whatever is being spoken? And last week we introduced just one concept which is just playing one chord, the four chord underneath all the talking. If you end the song on the four chord, it's going to give you that floaty feeling, that contemporary sort of instrumental music interlude kind of vibe. But we also talked about how the four chord has its limitations because it doesn't last very long. Like if you stay forever on the fourth chord, it's going to sound a little bit dry over a period of time. So today we're going to build on that concept, and we're going to talk about how we can incorporate different chords into our playing so that we can better support the whatever is being talked about, whatever is being said, and we can better create the mood and the atmosphere for the occasion. And when I share with my piano players, I call this playing the atmosphere. So playing the atmosphere. How do we play the atmosphere on the piano? And this is how I'll go about doing this. I'm going to give you a demonstration, and we're going to go back to the song that we've been using, which is Goodness of God, in the key of G. And as we talked about last time, we're going to end it in the same way. We're going to replace the four chord on the one chord, and we're going to sit on the four chord for a bit, and then the pastor comes up to say something, and we're going to pretend that he reads from Psalm 23.
Psalm 23, a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
And so that's the demonstration. That's what I call playing the atmosphere. And there's a couple of good things and bad things about this, as with any method. The good thing about this is hopefully you can tell that by moving the chords and playing the atmosphere like this, it creates a better feeling. It creates a better mood, creates different atmospheres for depending on what it was being talked about. And so that's the really good thing. And it also remains to be very flexible because you can exit out of that anytime. You're not fixed to a 4-bar loop or an 8-bar loop in a song. So it's very flexible, and it creates this necessary emotion for that occasion. The con, or the limitation of this is it remains to be very quiet and dynamic. It's a little bit lower in dynamic. If you want to amp up the dynamic a bit, it tends to get a little bit distracting by depending on how many notes you have to play in there. So it tends to be a little bit more softer side. But for me, 90% of the time, I can get away with playing like this at churches, especially near the ends of the worship set, or when you know that the prayer is going to be a little bit longer, or it's just a prayer service. You need to create the mood, or maybe it's an extended scripture reading. This is going to be very, very, very helpful. So how did I do this? Give you a few tips here, just like last time, and then I'll give you some tips on what to do when you're looking at this at home. First tip, just as last time, is make sure that you're not counting. This is free tempo, there's free time, you're not counting. I'm not counting at all. It just gives you that flexibility to get out of it as soon as you need to. And as always, I'm gonna start off with the 4 chord. The 4 chord, this is very neutral enough, a very flexible chord to start from. It's not very dark, it's not super happy in terms of the beginning chord. Also remember to sustain the sound. That's another tip that I have to give for you. So you can sort of do these alternating right hand, left hand things. Make sure you floor the pedal, well, until you change the chord, obviously. If you have pads on your keyboard, that's going to be really helpful for you. Now what you can do then from this point is you can go to all the chords inside the key, and you have 6 or 7 to choose from. You have the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, the 6 chord, and the 7th chord, which is I sometimes approach with caution. And each of these chords have their own quality. Each of them brings out a different mood. So for example, if we were to go to the 1 chord, for me, this feels a little bit more at rest. It's a little bit peaceful, calmer. This is a place of resolution, so there's not much going on here. And now if you go to the 2 chord, 2 chord for me, it's a little bit more sort of sophisticated. It's a little bit more in here. It's a little bit more in depth, and the song "Nothing Else" has a lot of 2 chord in it. So I think if you're thinking nothing else, the lyrics and stuff like that, that's the feel that you're going for with the 2 chord. That's the chord also I used at the beginning of that demonstration. It gives the song a little bit of a curious vibe to it, like a wondering kind of vibe. Like, is God really my shepherd? That's the vibe that it gives out. So that's the cool 2 chord, and then you can go to the 3 chord. The 3 chord for me, it's darker, it's really sharp, it's really edgy. So I don't use this often, but I do use it when it gets to a little bit more darker, when the sharing gets a little bit more darker. You could have used this when the psalm says, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's a good place to go about it. And obviously there's the 4 chord. The 4 chord feels very floaty, it's a little bit more neutral. And then there's the 5 chord. The 5 chord is, for me, it's a little bit more assertive, it's a little bit stronger. It's a little bit more positive, it's a little bit brighter. And then you get to the 6 chord. 6 chord is a little bit more melancholy, right? Valley of the shadow of death, you could do this here. But a 6 chord, it's a little bit more, it's not as obvious in terms of the darkness meter, so this is a good thing to use when you're talking about something ambiguous, for example, or you're wondering about the scenario, wondering about the outcome. And then the 7th chord I don't use a lot. And then you go back to the 1. Obviously you don't have to do that in that sequence, but I'm just going through each of them and telling you sort of what they mean for me. So for you then, when you use this approach by playing the atmosphere, what I do is when you're listening to the scripture or the prayer, and depending on what is being said, what is being shared, you can pick the chords that you feel like would paint that atmosphere, and then you just go to there, and then you stay on it for a little bit until the scenario changes, and then you go to another chord, and then when it gets developed a little bit brighter, a little bit darker, then you choose as you go. So then, as you can imagine, to get to this point, to practice to this point, what we have to do is we have to get really familiar with all the chords inside the key. Make sure you don't get out of the key. If you're playing any wrong notes and by wrong chords, then it tends to get very, very distracting. So make sure you know the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the next thing you want to do is you want to try to put your own labels onto those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chords. It's one thing for me to tell you what I feel like those chords are, and more or less those feelings I feel like it's more universal. But it's important for you to have a personal relationship with the chords so that you know what they do and you know what they feel like, and
my shepherd.
You know what they
shall not want.
You know what they do and you know what they feel like, so that you can use them at your own arsenal. You can use them as your own chords. So practice the chords going back and forth between the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and also putting a label on it and getting to know those chords and the feelings of it. Also, obviously, this goes without saying, make sure you practice them in different keys, so then you don't just play in G, you can play in C, you can play in A flat, and those chords will still make sense to you in these scenarios. So that's my tip for you. Play the atmosphere. You can start with the 4 chord, go into free time, and start picking out different chords that fit whatever is being talked about, whatever is being shared at that moment. And hopefully this is going to be a tool for you that you can use to paint the mood and a better atmosphere and better feeling for that specific occasion. If you enjoyed this video, leave me a like and let me know in the comment section below. And next 2 weeks, I believe we're going to wrap up the series of talking about underscoring, and we're going to talk about how to add a little bit more dynamic into it and different things that I use. So if this is something that you're interested in, make sure you subscribe and come back next Saturday for another video.